Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, faculty members, fellow students, and a very warm welcome on behalf of School of Architecture and Design to our distinguished guests and to Mr. Murali Ram, Dr. Annie Luz Nelson, Mr. Yosapon Bunsom, and Assistant Professor Apinya Limpaibun, and to all our guests today. Welcome to Future Landscape Architecture's event. It is my pleasure to be a moderator for this seminar. I am Tiptriya Pantong, third-year student from Architecture program. To begin with this program, may I invite Mr. Michael Paripon Tang Tongjit, Dean of SoA+D, to deliver the opening remarks. Please welcome.
Good morning, everybody. Welcome to the forum. It's our honor that Professor Sakharin Phumirat, our former president, is here today with us. And I would like to thank our speakers, Mr. Murali Ram, Anne, Yosapon, and Pichiap Apinya to come to share with us their points of view, which would be very beneficial for our school since we are starting our new program, Landscape Architecture, this year. And the ideas and your opinions would be put together as a part of the development of our new curriculum, which I think would be also producing future graduates who can contribute greatly to the world environment in the future. Next, I would like to thank our team also. It's quite a big team behind the scene, you know. Pichia, Piti, Ajahn Chris, Ajahn Phung, Kun Cha, Kun Bum, and admin office, especially Finn, who's coordinating all this to happen, and the facilitator team, students who helping organizing this event. Okay, not to take your time for so long, I think the very important thing is to hear and learn from our honored speakers. So I would declare the forum open. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Michael, for your remarkable opening speech. So right now, please allow me to introduce to our first speaker for this morning, Mr. Murali Ram, Program Director, Think City for Malaysia. He leads the Butterworth Urban Regeneration Program and head of the implementation of the Georgetown UNESCO World Heritage. And as the director of the talent, Mr. Murali guides the development of the talent strategies toward the improvement, talent performance, and performance management system. The Think City is a subsidiary of the National that advocates, facilitates, and demonstrates the contribution towards the resilient urban environment. It is focused city to regenerate city and solve contemporary urban issues with an emphasis on historical city centers. And today, his topic for this seminar is community, culture, and climate consideration in landscape design. Please welcome.
Good morning, everyone. Wow, there's an echo. Can you hear me clearly? At the back? No one can hear me. Can you hear me? Excellent. Right, let's get the slide up first. Can someone help with the slide, please? Right, good morning, everyone. My name is Murali. And I'm here, thank you for inviting me, first of all. So I'm here in distinguished company. I've got Yosapon, who I've known from the past, and Anne, and the professor is missing. All right, so today I'm going to speak about community, culture, and climate considerations in landscape architect. So what I'm going to do as the first speaker is focus on the why. Why is culture and community important when designing spaces? And why climate considerations are important when designing spaces. So that's my thing. Now, just this week, I read an article issued by the World Economic Forum, and they were examining the biggest issues facing humankind, and that includes you, in 2019 and for the next 2 years. Can you guess what is the three biggest issues? Well, the third biggest issue is economic uncertainty. Of course, you've got issues with a trade war brewing between China and the US, and we are all sort of caught in the middle. But there's nothing much, I suppose, you and I can do about it. And the second biggest issue is, unsurprisingly, climate change. And you would hear a lot of people talking about climate change. And I think here in Bangkok, I'm sure you already face this sort of problems with extreme weathers, drought, flooding, and these are issues that we all have to deal with. Even in Malaysia, we are having these issues of sudden rain and typhoon. We never had typhoons in the past, but last year we had a typhoon hit Penang. Now, but is there something you or the profession of landscape architects can do about it? Well, obviously, because it's about designing spaces to mitigate the effects of climate change, as well as putting in strategies to reverse the trend, if you can. Now, the biggest issue facing humankind for this year and next year is actually embodied in this picture. Can you imagine, can someone just shout out, what do you think this biggest problem is? Come on, participation, shout something so I can carry on talking. Air and water? Okay, the biggest issue is actually loneliness. And of course, this is a picture of people riding in a tube, most likely in London. And it's happening in big cities. People are moving from rural to the urban centers. Cities are getting bigger, but we don't talk to each other. And we are sitting in trains like this, going to, and nobody wants to look at each other. Everybody is listening, looking at their phone. And so when designing spaces, it's also important to see how the space can help with social interaction. So when you're designing a market, what are the opportunities for people to meet and talk? Because this is a big problems in big cities. In some European cities, more than 50% of the population live alone, and they yearn for people to talk to. So when designing spaces, it's also important to see how people interact, how you can, the way you put your benches. Do they face each other or do they face outward? Things like that, simple things like that. And movement of people and all that sort of thing. So this is my city, the city of Penang, which used to be part of Thailand a long time ago, as part of the Siam Kingdom. But anyway, we are now a UNESCO heritage site. And it's a big challenge because we have issues of gentrification, people moving out, because prices are rising. And we are having a program now to repopulate the city. So this is one of the case studies of this area where we are turning it into a green area to encourage people to come back and live in the city. Now this is how we built a park, and this is how the park looks like. Not every day, because this one, there's something going on, so we have a lot of people. So questions of why are we doing this? Who are we doing it for? And how are we going to do this? So basically, our main purpose for this was to arrest population decline. We hope with a new park, it will encourage people to move back into the area. And we designed it for residents, not for tourists. And there was an inclusive planning process in this whole process, in this whole construction. And there was a plan, so it was not just an isolated project, there's a greater plan, and it's all embodied in this sort of action plan for the city. And you would see the one in the red is where the place is, and we map out what is the distance between that space and other green spaces. So for us, it was about creating a network of green spaces and ensuring that they are connected through good walkways. Now, this was the place before we started. So it was a thief's market. You know, it's not like your Chatuchak. It's much worse. You turn up there and you can buy stolen goods. And people were peddling drugs and pornography. And people felt unsafe to go there. So families didn't want to live there. So we had a challenge. How do you move all these people and move them out to somewhere else? So there was a whole consultation process to address these issues: cleanliness, walkability, noise pollution, safety, and we wanted to arrest all this. So we did a pet shed analysis of how many people live around there, how many families, children, businesses, and we started asking people what they wanted, because we needed to make a case that the thieves market must move, and we need to convince the government that that is the right way to go. So we need to survey and find out public opinion so that the government would allow us to do what we wanted to do. It's a long time. It took 3 years, but all this planning was really important, because if we did not do it, after we build a park, they will come back. So you're back to square one. So we had to make sure that they understood why is it we are asking them to leave, and we give them another place to go so that they are safe. So their interest is also looked after, and they start paying something, and it becomes more formal, and they cannot sell drugs now, sorry. But at the same time, we want the residents to know why we're doing it. So this is something that we always say: we put people in the heart of the solution. We need to understand what they want, because they're the ones who are going to ultimately use the space. So these are some of our tools that we use. It looks fairly simple, but you know, we deal with simple people. They come and just put tags and say what they want, and then we survey them, and we record what they say. And sometimes that's how we start conversations going, so we get a feel of what is it that people's point of view are. We really go to the ground, literally, and talk to the people and share with them the ideas, and you know, as part of the design process. So eventually, this is the park today, and for this particular park, the idea was not so much what's inside the park, but what's outside the park, because we are sitting in a heritage area with beautiful buildings surrounding it. So all the chairs are facing outward, looking at these wonderful buildings. So it's about preserving the vista for this particular park. And we wanted to make sure it's inclusive, in a sense that, you know, people with wheelchairs and the blind can access it. So we actually called some of these people over to test it, so that we know that it can work or it can't work. Now, there's also this thing called program and space activation. I was at a talk in Korea recently, and there was a Japanese professor of architecture speaking, and he said, any landscape architect can design a beautiful park, but it takes a genius to program it. You know what programming is? Programming is getting people to use the space. So in this place in Korea, I looked out the window and there was a beautiful park, huge park. But day and night, there was no one using it. There's a place called Songdo in Seoul. There was no one using it. Incheon in Seoul. There was no one using it. So it was a bit disappointing. Well, partly that could be because it's not being planned for the people you expect to use it. So oftentimes in my line of work, I meet landscape architects whom very quickly we know we can't work with because all they want is their design and they want their design. And when you say, oh, you know, maybe this way, what about the people here? They don't care. They say, no, this is how it should look. But hello, are you designing for yourself or are you designing for its future use by the public? So you need to get that right at the onset. So programming is really important and you plan ahead. And there's this whole body of work around what we call placemaking today. Very simple terms, placemaking is a combination of design and activities to keep the place, to turn the place into a destination. So you need to inject a lot of energy into the space by organizing regular activities. It can be simple things like morning exercise or evening tea, whatever, you know, depending on what the community there is used to. But also understanding how people currently use the space and currently behave, so you factor that into your design. So some pictures of after, and here are some of the issues tackled. So what we do is we did a survey before we started, and after 2 years, we went back and did a survey of the residents to feel what they felt about it using the same parameter of questions. And that helped us measure the kind of impact that this investment has brought to the space. So as you see, you know, talking with friends has increased, exercise has increased, people watching has increased, sit and relax has increased, all the things that you want people to do in the park, and that was what the park was designed for. Again, you know, people are happy that their quality of life is improved, the community spirit has improved, and it has attracted new residents. So again, going back to the number one issue, which is loneliness, and fostering community interaction you have to have that in mind when designing new spaces. Now, aside from the park, the areas in pink are the back lanes. So we figured, while we're working on the park, let's also figure out how to get to the park. And there was all these back lanes that were looking like this. It was not the prettiest sight, and it was public land, but people had started occupying it and colonizing it. So they started cooking there, they put their things there, it became storeroom, etc. So we had all these temporary structures that we had to remove. Again, a whole round of community engagement to talk to the owners, to tell them, I'm sorry, you have to give way for a greater good. And you have to explain to them why you had to do it. And we also had issues of flooding. And the flooding issues, when we investigated, is because of blocks. There are blockages of the river, of the drains, and basically they were causing their own problems. And the surface was not permeable, so it was like, I think it was asphalt, and that wasn't helping either. So what we did was we started experimenting on some new material that could be, we call it porous concrete, so water can go through. We got some masons to work with different kind of aggregates to come up with what we felt was the best mix, and then we started deploying them in this back lane. So these are some examples of how we were experimenting on the site with samples, and there was also issue of utility. So you had water, and then you had telecom cables. I know in Thailand everything is up on the poles, but in Malaysia it's down, by the drain and all that. So we had to move it, and that's also part of the blockages. We had to move it to trenches in the middle, and then and that also involved a lot of engagement with the utility company because they didn't like it. But we had to tell them, look, this is why don't we share all these spaces? But here are some pictures of the before and the after. So you could see it's more welcoming, and actually people come and walk and actually use it. Before this, they just park their car there. So what this has done now is that it has now opened the eyes of the municipal council to consider using other back lanes as possible public spaces. They say, hey, why don't we, there's this back lane here, why don't we turn it into a cycling lane? Why don't we turn this into a little badminton space that people can use, you know? And this idea has now gone from that one space to other places in Malaysia, including Kuala Lumpur, and they've got a whole back lane upgrading program that has taken place, all starting with this one here in Penang. Now I take you to another city, just across the water, to Butterworth. In fact, you can take a train from Bangkok to Butterworth, 22 hours. You can get a sleeper, it's actually quite nice. And this is the place that I was dealing with. It's called, it's Jetty Lama, basically means old jetty. So this is where the old ships used to come, but then there's a highway, and you know, the place has just gone downhill and not much use. So it was like something like this. It's a heritage quarter, and we're looking to how to rejuvenate it. So we looked at this space and we said, hey, wait a minute, there's this car park, and there's a temple, and people come there and feed birds, so you know there's some sort of activity going on, but it looks horrible. And we said, how can we attract businesses back here? And one of our analysis, we said, let's introduce a park in this area. And it also addresses a bigger problem, which is in the city, when we did our mapping, we found that there is not enough public spaces. There's just not enough. So we had to be creative in creating new public spaces. So which is why we pushed for this idea of turning this car park into a little park where you can also park your car. So that is basically the key idea. Now, when we started out, we were thinking, okay, this is how we're going to do it. We'll keep the car park, but we'll break the asphalt and create a rain garden. And this is some of our design inspiration for rain gardens. I'm sure you're familiar with it. It helps to arrest water flow and holds water, and it helps with retention or detention of water so that it doesn't quickly run off into the system. So yeah, we did a bit of investigation, and these are some of our design inspirations. Now, what we did was, these are some of our sort of plans, right? So car park, and then you have the green. You can see in the corner, it's got terrace, and that's to sort of represent the paddy fields that are in that area. And we also designed it to have events, because we knew the temple was using it twice a year to have events, temple events. But we said, if the temple can do it, why don't we, this could also be an event space. So we actually made sure there is electricity supply, so that you can have an event and plug in, things like that. And eventually, it should look like this. Nice, beautiful park with the temple at the foreground. We were going to launch the park. Guess what happened? There was a protest. In the middle of the night, we had about 400 people turning out to protest against the building of this park. And it was quite a difficult time, because when we found out why it was, this is people from the temple who want the land for themselves. So they said, no, we want this land. I said, okay, what do you want to do with it? No, we just want it. I said, what do you want to do with it? This is for you. You can use the space. No, we want the land. You know, that's all they want. They want the land. So they couldn't understand that this is for the better good. So luckily for us, we've already done our community engagement. So when we go to the government, we say, hold on a minute, we know these guys came to protest, but we've already spoken to so many people, including the temple people, and they helped us design this thing. So who are these people? So obviously there's some sort of people who are not happy or something, and they've mobilized this crowd of 400 to come and protest. But thankfully, we have a process, and we've mapped out who we've talked to and why we're doing it, and that helped the administration say, okay, you go ahead. So when we finish, this is how the park looks like today. Here's a picture of it. We have a festival there every twice a year. So this is during one of those festivals. It's called the Butterworth Fringe Festival. And you can see from an aerial view how we put the, so luckily we had this planning ahead so that we know this place can now also function as a event space. Now, the people who protested, they are coming back and they're using they're the ones using the space. That's the funny part, you know. The very people who protested against building the park are the ones, and they approached me after that to say, can they build another park somewhere? Where's the temple? Temple is, I don't have the, yeah. Temple is here. They want to build another park somewhere here. So they've come to ask us for help to design a park for them. So, you know, it's a great shift in mindset of the good common use of public spaces. Okay, as I said just now, in this area, there was not enough public spaces. And we had to create new spaces. So here is an example of a back alley. The before photos, there was nothing. It was just a back alley without any art, you know, and people parked their cars there. So we started this project working with the homeowners or office owners and said we want to do a public art project. So really, it didn't really involve so much landscape architecture as much as we involved artists in the process. And it was a process of storytelling about the place and the history of the place and all that. And slowly the art moved from one block to another block to another block, and then we had competitions and people started coming, and then we realized we need to put some seats, then we put some seating, and then we put some trees to soften the landscape. And then somebody else came in and said, I will sponsor lights. And they put up these lights, and now it's active day and night, and within 2 years, it has become its own destination. They call it Butterworth Art Walk. So something that didn't exist before, now they say, oh, let's meet at Butterworth Art Walk. And it's just an alleyway. And businesses have started opening, and new businesses started coming. And this is an example of an event that we have every month in the space, and people just come. They just love the fact that it's narrow and there's some lights and, you know, there's this art, they take photo. It's all about taking photos nowadays. I don't know what's happened to people, you know. But again, when designing, you need to think about photo opportunities as well. I mean, that's as sick as that may sound, but, you know, that's the disease we live in. Okay, now I take you to another park, and this is a picture from 1883 at the opening of a park in Georgetown. And you can see the central feature is the fountain. So we call it the Fountain Garden. And it was donated by this rich businessman called Kaur, who also had ties to Ranong district. He was the governor of Ranong district in Siam. And over the years, over 100 years, this is what's happened. If you see the left picture over here, everything has become concrete, right? So we then had to plan to change it to something more light. But what I want to talk to you about is the process. So this is a project of conservation of a historic garden. So what we did was, we looked for best practices, and the best practices is contained in this place called the Florence Charter, which is accepted by ICOMOS, UNESCO support system. So the Florence Charter teaches you how to, the matrix that you use, what kind of significance to put into layout, into kind of plants that are planted, what was the original intent of the designer, that sort of thing. So you can see the fountain was white. Then what we did was we stripped off all the paint, layer by layer, to find out what was the original color of the fountain. And then we used historic photographs to find out what was the original layout and what kind of plants were planted back in the 1800s. And then we had an idea what it could have looked like. So today, in fact, this park is being launched tomorrow. I will leave from here to go for the launch at 6 o'clock in the evening tomorrow. So this is basically the design as we could see from the early maps. And here is the fountain in its original color. And interestingly, this same fountain could be found in Adelaide, in Australia. And Adelaide is Georgetown's sister city. And the color is also the same. So, it's not a coincidence, obviously, but we didn't like this color. It looks horrible, but that's the original color. So we thought, why not? Okay, so now I take you to another project. This is in the process of design at the moment. This is a very famous street called Mongkut Street in Penang, which is like an Indian, little India, you could say. But look at the space. It's all full of cars. You can't walk. But so many people come there, and yet you can't walk, and it's full of cars. So we have some money from the government. The government said, okay, I'm going to give you so much money. You deal with the traders. So we're talking to the people. And first we did some studies as to, okay, which area we're going to tackle, what is special about the place. And you can see it's very colorful, and it's got a lot of charm. But there are issues. So when we talked to the business people, we agreed on certain things, to have one lane of vehicular traffic. We widened the sidewalks so people can walk. This is part of the plan to reduce people from coming into the city with cars. So we take away the car park. We allow car parking only for motorcycles, because if you don't, we know they're going to park on the sidewalk. We're going to have 2 areas for loading and unloading. And, in terms of trees and all that, we had the discussion. So next step, we also study the sun movement, and we see which are the interesting features on the street architecturally that we think holds more significance. It has better aesthetic values than others, because you want to preserve your vista. And then in terms of tree planting, we also studied where we can plant the trees that will give you best shade in the evenings. And of course, nowadays you also have to plan for Grab, so there's a place for drop-off and all that. If you don't want people to drive, they also need to look into how they get to the space. So now we are at a stage where we have a few design options that we can go back to the community and say, okay, this is what we've agreed before. Now what do you think? Do you want this, something like this, with hanging temporary structures? Or do you want something more permanent, like this, which you can use for your things as well? Or shall we do something more modern, like this? So we're going to ask them what they think. And then, it's just that you need to get their buy-in, so that you want them to behave, but you need to get them to agree so that we can go back, hey, we already done this engagement, most people wanted this, so can we have a common idea? Okay, so here are some of the aspects that we look at. Hardscape, easy enough. Softscape, what kind of planting? What is the height of the trees that you want? Is it going to give you the shade that you want? Is it going to block certain views that you hold sacred? Urban furniture, what kind of chairs do we want to put in? Is it chairs that deter people from sleeping, or people can, what kind of rubbish bins, shape, size? Signage, where do you get from one place to another? Things like lighting, what kind of lighting? Positioning, drainage, to address issues of flooding and all that. And landscape architecture goes very closely with drainage issues, unfortunately, and that's a big issue. Signage, as I said. Public art. So public art is, we feel is important because it helps tell a story, especially when something is lost or moved, and there's this thing to remember the area by. Now, Songkla, if any of you have been to Songkla recently, they used to come visit us about 5 years ago, the Songkla Heritage Trust. And today they've done a fantastic job in Songkla using public art. And the place is just so lively. We just went there last month for the South Fest Art Festival for the first time they were having. And it was really a good community feel, Songkla. So if any of you are looking for a good place to retire, you know where to go. All right. Just the last segment, I'm going to touch about urban cooling strategies. We talked about climate change, and it's really happening. And we find that in Penang, in Malaysia, which is not far from Bangkok, we are having a real issue of getting uncomfortable because of the heat. And Malaysian people, they don't want to walk You know, 250 meters, they're like, you know, I don't want to drive. So we need to plan so that people don't sit in the car at every chance they get. How can we get people to walk more so that we reduce the carbon emissions, plus reduce the need for car parks, etc. Now, well, I'm sure Anne will talk more about climate change after me. And you can see things like, you know, how this is real. And it is actually, it is going to get warmer. And the weather is going to get more unpredictable. And you have this thing called the urban heat island effect. And I'm sure you have it in Bangkok because we look out of the window and all we see is buildings. There are buildings, buildings, buildings as far as your eye can see. Even without the haze, I think I still cannot see where the hills are and where the trees are. So you have a problem. So we did a simulation and we found that in Georgetown, we're going to have at least 1.5 degrees rise in temperature in the next, say, 10 to 15 years. But that means at night, it can go up to about 6 degrees, which is a problem. So how do we address it? So we know it's going to happen. How do we address it? So that's where landscape architecture comes in. So we have a few strategies that we are thinking about. Natural systems using trees, creation of wind corridors. That's not a new thing, but it's something that's catching on. And basically different kind of surfaces. So green and blue surfaces. And then you've got artificial systems and technological solutions. So planting, I cannot stress more how much more and more planting helps with the shading, helps with the transpiration of the plants and putting in more humidity into the air, and wind flows. So just some pictures, you get the picture, you know, tree shade, and here are some differences with the tree, without the tree, the kind of surface temperature that you get with appropriate shading. And it doesn't cost much to plant trees as opposed to putting in more hard structures. And these are advantages of introducing more water in your city. And color of pavements also seem to make a difference. In Penang and in KL, we have this thing called 5-foot ways. I'm sure you have it here too. It's basically walkways that are supposed to be open to the public so that people can walk past shops and all that. But oftentimes it's blocked because individuals want to use it as their own space. So we have this whole thing about, we have a little fund that we use to go and help people clear the 5-foot ways so people can walk more comfortably. And it's already there. This infrastructure has been put in, you know, 100 years ago maybe, and they've already thought about it, how to protect yourself from the heat and the rain. And with regard to the wind tunnel, so this is something that we are also experimenting. We're not experts yet. There's this building that we're doing rejuvenation of, and we're looking at how to plant the trees to channel the wind from the sea into the city. And there are some examples from Phoenix, Arizona, where targeted planting, not planting everywhere, but targeted planting of trees can help divert winds that can help cool your city. So it's something that you can consider looking into, simulations, topographical simulations, etc. And it's an emerging field of study, I would imagine. So there's a lot of literature out there about why we need more trees. You can go and find out. And in New York, they even have a street trees map. And I don't have to read it to you. Benefits of street trees: stormwater interception, energy conservation, air pollutants removal, and carbon dioxide uptake. My last bit, this is a river. It looks very different from your Chao Phraya. I tell you why. Because this river has got mangroves and has got all this vegetation around it, whereas, I'm sorry, your river doesn't. And here you can walk around the river. So we have a project dealing with the river, and the question is, how do you, and this is in the city, by the way, in the city. And the river is under threat with development and all that. So we're working on a project to see how we can rehabilitate the river as well as maintain the ecosystem around it. Now, the river is on that side, right, on the left. And this is sort of like the jungle that has grown by the river. And this is a little space. I wouldn't call it a park. And there are housing on the other side. So the housing is all on this side of the road. And then you've got a little park. And so my challenge is, what do I do with this space? Do I put in a fancy park? Do I remove the green and put in some structures that people can go and play volleyball? What do I do? So that is the question. So, of course, there are many ample choices, but we also consider issues like the Sustainable Development Goals and what is it that we want to achieve for the city. And we have issues of sustainable cities, life below water, clean water, climate action, life on land. And we see that this place is a haven for wildlife. We have otters that live on the riverbank. We've got different types of fish under the water. We've got all kinds of shrimp. And there's also a prawn farming that goes on. They prawn the farms at the root of the mangrove trees. They spawn prawns, I think. And it's near to a bird watching site, which has about 140 different species of birds. And they also travel through this park. And when we walk there, we realize, hey, wait a minute, there's all these colorful birds, blue, green, yellow, all the primary colors are there. So it's interesting. So what do we do with this space since it has a lot of this rich life? So as part of our bigger picture for the river, we have a plan to rehabilitate the river, meaning to clean the river back to possibly in 10 years, we want to make it a drinking water source. So you can take the water and process it for drinking, because we are running out of drinking water. Connecting the river to communities, so they have public space. I mentioned earlier, there was not enough public space. So the river reserve can actually become public space. Activating the space, the programming aspect of it, getting people to come and do things together, it combats things like loneliness, depression, or that sort of thing. Celebrating the river so that people look after the river and they don't throw their cooking utensils and stuff in the drain that ends up in the river. So there's this. So it's about behavioral change as well as a little bit of science and landscape architecture. So coming back to this question, what do you do? So at the moment, we haven't decided yet. We're still talking to the people. But at the moment, what we're thinking is we want to retain this site. Oh, sorry. Oh, can I get the last slide back, please? What we're thinking is we want to retain the vegetation, which is on the waterfront, and let it be wild, because there's a lot of bees and insects that actually come there, and it's really important for biodiversity. And we want to measure how much more of these species turn up. We want to keep the trees on the other side, create a walkway, but also turn this place into a learning center. So mark out every of the plants, and people know about the properties of the trees and the name and history, etc. So right now, our thinking is more towards keeping it as a learning park. Something like a botanical gardens, but on a small scale, something of a learning park, while we also celebrate the biodiversity that uses the place. Because for us, the community that uses the space is not only the people, but also the other species that share the place with us. And with that, that brings me to the end of my presentation. Thank you very much. I hope I was clear enough. I didn't get any questions. But when you do your marking, you give me high scores, okay? Give me the 5. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Murali, and sorry for the last slide that couldn't show up. Well, I believe that a lot of us have gained a lot of knowledge about his experiences with dealing with a lot of communities and yes. Okay.